these large language models are just getting larger and larger. We thought that billion parameter models were going to be the biggest and baddest, but now we're starting to see multi-trillion parameter models. But one of the things you may not recognize is that those parameters have to be stored in memory in a GPU somewhere. And so the larger the model, the more memory that GPU needs. You may also have noticed that memory prices have gone up a lot in the last year or so as people have been contracting to build huge AI data centers and taking up all of the available capacity for that memory. Leads us to wonder, how long can this massive expansion and growth go? Is this the right way for us to be continuing to pursue AI? And I think as we start getting to the point where real business is being done with AI, companies are using AI to make decisions and to build AI processes into their applications, the scalability here starts to become a real challenge, and the cost of producing an answer becomes a vital part of the discussion. And is it a good idea to keep building bigger and bigger and yet bigger GPUs as we go along?
I tend to think this is a time where we need to ask ourselves about what it is we're trying to solve. And that's the generic product management type answer. But a lot of times, I think we are thinking that we need to scale up as opposed to scale out. And I think there's an opportunity to essentially work smarter versus harder, in the sense that harder meaning spending more capital and building for the skyscraper deployment. In reality, it kind of brings into question how much AI is done at the edge versus centralized. And I think for the training side of things, it may make sense, but I also think there's an opportunity for us to pull back and ask the question. The frontier model vendors are really pushing us forward. And that's good and bad because they're not necessarily thinking about optimizing for the every enterprise, if you will. They're optimizing for biggest, baddest, right? Like we are invincible. And at some point, there's an inflection point of, is this cost prohibitive? And what are the real ROIs on this investment?
I think part of it is that there's going for the larger model is just bragging rights at this point without actually coming up with a necessary use for it. And while certainly having the largest model for bragging rights is a goal, if that's what you're trying to achieve, it doesn't necessarily accomplish the goals of the everyday person trying to make use of the AI models.
Yeah, I have a real world example of that, Andy. I was watching myself and the coding I've been doing and the work I've been doing across, in this case, like Opus 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8. And I tend to gravitate toward the newer one, partly because it is better and because it's part of the plan. What I've been trying to do lately is step back and look at what models are acceptable for subsets of the task. How do we divide up tasks into what's good enough from 6-7 months ago, which in AI time is like a decade ago, and what do we actually need the front end for, the cutting edge?
Yeah, I think there's something right. It comes back to money in the end. It comes back to what value you're delivering. Are you delivering more value than it costs to buy that value? And just using larger and larger models can't continue to deliver larger and larger value, or is unlikely to continue to deliver larger and larger value for every use case. And I think that maturity of what's the right solution for the problem I'm trying to solve here becomes important.
And a lot of times in the enterprise over years, we've talked about right sizing, right? There's always been this theme of right sizing. And that to me speaks to when you're really getting into production as opposed to experiments and development research, right? And I think that's partially too where things are moving so fast. We're still in that research phase. We're still in that product development side of this versus the, in terms of the frontier models, right? At the same time, it's that whole quintessential reassembling the plane while it's in the air thing, right? We're reinventing the plane while it's in the air, as opposed to taking a pause and looking at what does this really mean to actually go into deployment in production.